I'm from Argentina, before it was cool, actually. And let me tell you a bit how I started in this to get maybe an intro. Decentralized law. So as I said, I'm from Argentina, which is the world capital of crypto, and I see Argentinians very much overrepresented in the audience. I see some familiar faces, and we are overrepresented because we lived in a country with very much failed institutions, and kind of crypto, blockchains in general, were a way to compensate for that, right? So the question I asked myself years ago was, okay, we live in this country with this very much failed justice system. People don't have access to justice because it's expensive, because it's slow, because it's corrupt in many cases. Can we use blockchain to reinvent dispute resolution? Can we use blockchain to make a decentralized justice system that can give people access to justice even in situations where the state justice systems don't work very well? Those were the early ideas that now became Kleros. I know people know Kleros here. How many of you know Kleros? A bunch of, okay. We have a bunch of people who know Kleros. Kleros is a decentralized justice protocol. It's used in different types of situations. You can use this for small claims. You can use this for solving Web3 disputes. If you have a protocol that has disputes between users like e-commerce or freelance and Airbnb disputes, you could plug this to Kleros, and Kleros picks a panel of jurors and will give you a decision. Enough about me. Let's introduce our panel. I was going to just read your bio, but I'd say maybe why don't you just introduce yourself? So let's start by Kelsie. Please tell us a bit about you and why are you passionate about decentralized law?
Sure, thank you. So my name's Dr. Kelsie Nabben. I did my PhD in Australia and my postdoc at the European University Institute. My PhD was on resilience in decentralized technologies, and I'm a social scientist. So I'm interested in these as in decentralized technologies as socio-technical systems. So I'm looking at the human factors that kind of interplay with the technology. And my current research is on security in blockchains as an example of security in the digital economy.
Layer Zero.
Hello, everybody. My name is Layer Zero. Happy to be with you all today. I am a Colombian lawyer, and legal is my background. And I have been in the crypto rabbit hole since 2017. And at MakerDAO, I started at MakerDAO 3.5 years ago in a core unit that at that time was called the Sustainable Ecosystem Scaling Core Unit. So we worked a lot about DAO tooling operations, DAO operations. We had an incubation program. We run scaling strategies for the DAO, which included also legal support. And 1 year ago, probably many of you are familiar with the restructuring process of MakerDAO, one of the most comprehensive restructuring process in the whole industry. As part of that restructuring, Maker outsourced or spinned off its previous core units. That's what happened with our core unit. Now we are called Powerhouse, and Powerhouse is an independent and spin-off from MakerDAO. And what we do, we build operational and legal infrastructure for DAOs. In particular for MakerDAO, also for our own team, because we are structuring ourselves as a network, as a decentralized network organization. So we provide operational and legal infrastructure for our own emerging DAO, for Maker and beyond. My interest now, my biggest interest is in system design, legal system design. This is what we are building, our complex systems. You have written about cybernetics and DAOs. And that's a topic that I find quite fascinating because it's when you have these mind models from system design, that you can cope with all the complexities that we are dealing with. So legal system design and legal infrastructure for DAOs and for network organizations is my greatest hobby.
Good. We have some, I don't know, hopefully it's not the NSA interference, It's your mic or mic? It's censorship. Well, I don't know. Or it's mine. Very good? Okay. No, it's mine. Yeah, Eric, go ahead.
Okay. Awesome. Well, my name is Eric Alston, Finance Division, University of Colorado Boulder. I'd say in the broadest buckets, I place my research into constitutions, economic institutions, and digital governance dilemmas. And people are like, wow, that seems like a heck of a wide range of things. And I'm like, it's actually not even a range of things. It's all one thing. And so for me, ultimately, I view blockchain networks as a sort of fascinating form of secondary rules in digital contexts that productively coordinate people's interests in our increasingly sort of digitally intermediated world. And so for me, though, everything's incomplete, pursuant to Layer's point about complexity. And so how these systems design ways to make decisions in real time about the unforeseen is kind of one of the central elements of what animates my research and consulting work in the area. And I think ultimately questions of dispute resolution and ideally justice emanating from that are central to any kind of vibrant governance system over a sufficiently large and complex human group.
Cool. Well, let's get into it then. So let's start by a bit, what are the core principles that you think should guide decentralized law? Maybe we can start with Kelsie.
Sorry, I was giving eyes to the audience just to sort of see who's in the room. Could you please re-ask the question?
Yeah. So what do you think are the core principles that should guide decentralized law?
Yeah, so the way I am currently thinking about this comes out of a working paper that I've co-authored with Professor Ellie Rennie at RMIT. And the core tenet is that security is fundamental to statehood in both the physical and in the digital world. And so the core tenet, before we can talk about decentralized justice, has to be security in the digital ecosystem. And so the work that we've done, it was an ethnography, so an anthropological style study of a open source hardware chip startup that calls themselves a crypto state called Kongland. And we pretty much look at that as providing an alternative to the state by through the provision of hardware security with the open source cryptographically verifiable chips that they're offering. And so I'll get nerdy on it and then I'll bring it back. So we used the metaphor of the stationary bandit by Menker Olson. And I'm not a public choice theorist, which is why I say metaphor. But the idea is that the role of the state or the function that the state holds is to have a monopoly on violence. And so if decentralized technologies are to be a better bandit than the stationary bandit of the state that takes taxes but provides basic security in exchange, then decentralized technologies have to be able to provide that security. And so I said before that my current research is on security and blockchain, and I've been looking at a not-for-profit organization led by Sam Sizzy's son, a white hat hacker. And I've been looking at how the actual security audit firms, the white hat hackers, and also the adversaries all kind of interact, and the necessary infrastructure that's social, technical, legal, and economic to start to provide that security in this land of one-way irreversible transactions where there are, very big, very well-resourced hacks occurring.
Layer 0. So what does this look like from the practitioner point of view? Can you tell us a bit about what technologies are essential for enabling decentralized law, and a bit also about your experience in the maker governance?
Yeah, sure. So I had the privilege to experience very directly the pains of a large and complex project like MakerDAO. It is complex because not only because of the size of the project or the value that is transacted in it, but because the governance surface or the actions and decisions that the system allows to take were very, very broad, very, very wide, very open. And to manage a decentralized stablecoin, and not only that, but has the aspiration for serving the real world economy, requires a lot of complex legal structures in the real world. And take that into a governance system that was one of the first crypto projects to implement on-chain governance and to implement delegation. But the governance system was not sophisticated enough to manage the complexity of decisions. And it turned out that during the bear market, that governance turned dysfunctional. And you cannot put like all type of votes to delegates that have like a higher order, like vision, perspective. And from that to the most granular operational decisions, if you put them all of that in same structure without any additional structure around it, then it turns into dysfunctional. So it turns into like toxic behavior and paralysis and politics, a lot of politics, like in the real world. And then the project started to lose money in the bear market. Then that's led to Rune, the founder, coming back and restructuring all the governance process. And part of the restructuring is to divide the operational from the politics, the governance, the decision-making system from the operation of technical operation. And so DAOs are very fantastic, experimental, new type of organization for some things, but are very bad on other things. They're great and novel because you can extend ownership, you can collective governance over a commons, for example. They are democratic and open, and anybody can access them without being discriminated. That is great, but DAOs are very bad at executing and operationalizing. So what Maker under the new structure is building the structures that the DAO needs to let the DAO do what DAOs do well, and outsource or spin off and create specific, very specialized entities that perform specific functions that any organization needs. Functions like operations, like IP management, like capital allocation, fundraising, commercial, all of these type of activities that you need legal entities that but for very specific purpose. And we are designing this legal platform and letting the DAO be DAO.
This is a bit what I like about this space, that I mean, we have these concerns about technology and how to build these decentralized tools, but at the same time, we are still, working with people, and politics is the way in which humans do stuff in organizations, right? So, and the right way to put these energies of people for a common goal is, I guess, through the correct mechanisms, right? So they don't become internal politics in fighting. So Eric is an expert, and he has designed lots of constitutions for DAOs. Tell us a bit about how you see decentralized law and how the mechanism that you have to put in place for this to work.
And so folks, especially in blockchain communities, might well take my perspective on this question as hostile to the extent to which we can ex ante mechanism design the actions of participants in a particular ecosystem. And it's not. I'm like, the more we can reliably and legibly do so, heck yeah, automate that. Give everyone the certainty in the way things will execute, and that leaves more space for the fact that we can never fully program the action space of the messiness of human intent as mapped to any particular algorithmic system. But to me, that means there is always going to be a gap between what you can fully design ex ante and what you need to decide on as a complex human group. And so I know trilemmas are very popular in these ecosystems. And so I view how you can define what good decentralized law should look like, as well as how you can define what good governance should look like, as itself a trilemma, which is you can't have everything all at once. What do I mean by that? I think every good governance regime should be ideally representative, equitable, and sustainable. And the fact of the matter is, every ideal decision should represent as many community members as possible. But the will of the majority sometimes wants awful things. And so that's not to say that in every instance, that which is representative is desirable. Sometimes it's radically inequitable to do so. So there are naturally massive constraints that you want to put on a majoritarian decision in any particular environment. And there's a way we could tread that line if we had infinite resources to do so. What do I mean by that? Well, if we could literally expend all time and effort possible on every single decision, we would probably get it right in terms of balancing representativity and equitability. But no group has infinite resources, and therefore we have to cabin all of our decisions made within any particular group by the constraints of limited resources and limited information. And so for me, somewhere within that triumvirate, all important governance decisions should reside, although striking that balance in practice is darn hard.
This is a question for any of you. And a bit like I see in this space, there is like this tension a bit between we are building a decentralized legal system for decentralized new organizations, blockchain. Now they call them network states. In the past, there was a different name. Are we building this for those new organizations, new communities, or these tools can interact and can help design better real-world existing, communities? Whoever wants to pick this hard question.
So the tension is between what and what?
Do you think that this can? How are the interactions with the real legal systems that exist?
I'll kick this off. I was just talking to folks that are trying to do a pop-up village in India this morning, and I think there's a real tension, which is sovereign guarantees are very, very hard won from the countries that have the best rule of law and the best institutions. Not in an absolute sense. Every country has its problems, but boy, are there some places that protect individual rights and economic institutions in ways that many, many societies don't. And not coincidentally, those are the societies, the ones that protect those things, are the societies that are the most prosperous. But good luck getting a sovereign jurisdictional guarantee out of any of those governments. Problem being, though, is the more you try to set up a network state, a coordination, you choose your preferred nomenclature for your particular startup society. And to me, in places that are most willing to give you jurisdictional guarantees, those guarantees are only as good as the particular regime that is in power at a given moment. And so there's a really radical dilemma that is situated right there, which is it a startup city in Wyoming, which will fight so hard for every last inch of sovereignty that they obtain, but those sovereign jurisdictional guarantees that they do obtain will be much more likely to be enforced by U.S. courts than, say, currently the ructions that Prospera is experiencing with respect to the Honduran government. And so for me, there isn't a simple answer, but that is one of the critical tensions that I see undergirding a place-based choice of where to try to create a startup community. But the question is, do you need a fixed location? Because one of the other interesting margins that I'm seeing with these pop-up communities is the fact that some are trying to be ephemeral by design. That has a lot of benefits, but boy, have human communities been defined by a fixed geospatial location for a heck of a long time, such that is a fundamental trade-off with that particular design choice as well.
I think DAOs are slowly acknowledging this tension. And do you see like the first years of DAOs was like this more naive approach, or the absolutist code is law, right? And whatever output we have from code, then that should be a legitimate output. But what happens if the system dysfunction or behaves in a different way as designed? Then you need a more qualified code deference, but a qualified code deference principle that you could say code has priority as the system of law, but in certain situations we want and we need legal recourse and we need legal entities like legacy. But what we in reality need, and what we are working in the maker ecosystem and a powerhouse, is to design hybrid legal entities that have code deference. That means they are controlled in some way or another by governance of a DAO. And I think that's the way of alleviating this tension. It is an opportunity that we have, a whole new design space to design new like hybrid techno-legal solutions, entities that are co-governed or controlled by DAOs, or contracts that refer to smart contracts or to wallets or to on-chain tools in this design space. Because we know, as you were saying, we live in the real world. If we do business, if we want to offer a functional system for the world, we need to design instruments that are compatible with this vision and that are practical. So like very practical things, like how to hire people, how to hire contributors. Well, we need an entity. This entity needs to sign a contributor contract, and you have to issue an invoice to this entity so you can file your taxes as a contributor, from the very basic operational functions to more complex ones. The opportunity to bridge this tension is in this design of hybrid techno-legal tools.
And I'll add to that question as well. So I think that there's always going to be an interplay between decentralized infrastructure and traditional legal systems. One helpful framing for me to think about that comes out of BlockchainGov, a research group that I'm part of that's led by Primavera De Filippi, and that's the endogenous legitimacy and the exogenous legitimacy. And there's ways to look at that about, in what ways does the decentralized polity create legitimacy that pushes out into existing legal systems, and in what ways do the existing systems impose on the polity. And one way that projects or people aspiring to parallel societies might want to think about this is what parts of the incumbent infrastructure can they actually take advantage of towards their aims. So, for example, I was speaking to a legal colleague, Joni Pirovich, yesterday, and she was saying, clients come to her when they make, when they're phished. So they'll make a very substantial transaction and it goes to the address that they didn't intend. But the first response is to contact centralized exchanges and ask them to freeze the funds. So that's an example where, we're saying decentralize everything, parallel societies, blah, blah. But then coming back to that security fundamental, you actually do want some guarantees that your money goes where you intend it, for example, and that there may be some recourse or accountability structure or a way to draw back on legal guarantees of nation states or traditional justice systems as well.
We have also experienced a bit, this, when we started Kleros in the early days, we were a bit focused on, okay, all of the world is going to Web3, people are going to use decentralized Airbnb, decentralized, e-commerce, decentralized everything, and they will need dispute resolution. Someday that might happen, and we will spend more time in decentralized virtual world and metaverses. But we have learned that in order to have a real impact, we needed also, at least in the shorter term, to address the disputes that real life people have, which includes a better way of onboarding them into. And they don't even need to use crypto for using Kleros, right? You can use this with a fintech app or with we just made an agreement with the Supreme Court in Argentina in a province called Mendoza for them to use Kleros for as a consultative way to resolve neighborhood disputes. Real life, real people kind of situations that can deliver better justice for these situations.
So you're colonizing the traditional legal systems with your decentralized mechanisms.
It's a hybrid design of dispute resolution systems because, I still think that in the long term, we will spend more time in decentralized apps and the full early version or vision of Kleros will be realized. I don't know how long it will take. That is a matter maybe of timing, and this gives me perfect for my next question. What do you think? What does a world look like where decentralized law has, been adopted? How do you imagine this world to work?
So a world where decentralized law has been adopted?
Yeah, it succeeded completely.
I'm a fan of decentralization, but I think that there's a deep fan, to be very clear, but I think that there's a common fallacy that's very, very human, which is we crave a perfect solution. We want to reduce uncertainty to zero, and we can never actually do so. And therefore, to me, every institutional solution is imperfect, and it needs to be tailored to a particular context, and there is no single silver bullet solution. And so for me, one thing that's often lost is centralization has been emergent in human social orders for a long time because of certain efficiencies that are wrought therefrom. It also allows for a lot of oppression and a lot of subversive outcomes, to be very clear. But all else equal, everyone needing to participate in every single decision for every single community of which they want to belong to or invest in it beggars the very attention that anyone would have in a given day. And so for me, something alongside decentralization that should be considered is another piece of constitutionalism, if you will, which is democracy is not thought to be universally good, absent constraints on its exercise. And so for me, checking and balancing certain concentrated fonts of governance authority is another emergent feature of constitutionalism that's underappreciated. And so I think a vision of decentralized law that fits those principles that I already articulated, sustainability, equitability, and representativity, a vision of decentralized law that does so will be one that has some pockets of concentrated authority. You need an arbiter to resolve a dispute between two people, and that is centralized. Even the mustered panels that Claros uses are centralizing briefly and in a very constrained way an authority over the people subject to that particular dispute resolution. And so for me, separating and checking and balancing any of those concentrated fonts of governance authority is essential. But I'd like to end on a positive note with this point, which is transparency is tremendously valuable when it comes to the exercise of concentrated governance authority. And so I think another benefit of the extent to which observable actions in these ecosystems are legible to anyone that cares enough to actually perceive them is a fundamental constraint on any concentrated font of governance authority running away with the ball. That being said, I'm also pretty concerned about the extent to which your average token holder doesn't seem to even want to show up to vote or pay attention to what's going on, because boy, does that cut against the restraint that transparency otherwise provides if those with power know that everyone subject to that power is watching their every move in that concentrated governance authority context.
Yeah. For me, the key factor for adoption is accessibility. And we need tools, open source tools. We need public goods. We need legal public goods, legal infrastructure. So we have, with blockchains, we have a system, and from the legal perspective, it's a system of rules. You can, with blockchain technology, with smart contracts, you can design rules, you can execute these rules and enforce them all at once without an intermediary. So that's very revolutionary. This capacity of creating normative systems and to creating them in a way that are fully transparent and automatically enforceable is quite new, and is what is driving all this like DAO movement. Nevertheless, what we have seen is that DAOs face innumerable operational and legal challenges, and the legal service industry is from the old age. We have the legacy legal service industry is proprietary, it is closed source, so we cannot, all DAOs are solving the same problems, but all of them are paying counsel, and because counsel is confidential, you cannot share your findings, then this knowledge is lost. We cannot allude to the collective intelligence, and the legal services industry is, for this new Web3 movement, it is out of date. So we have, with blockchain technologies, with DeFi, we have public financial infrastructure. So the question is, what public legal infrastructure we need to support the system? And for us, the way is to develop open source templates. Open source templates, we work in particular with Powerhouse with one particular that is called a document model, which is a system or format for structuring data. But structuring data can be anything, or for formalizing processes, business processes. And data as a tool, as an open source tool that every project could use. And from the legal area, you can use document models as open source tools to automate, to formalize, and to automate business processes and turn them into apps. And through apps, they have also a normative function, because through apps, you enforce a specific process or a best practices or a standard. So we use apps and blockchain-based token and smart contracts to embed these rules into software and to make them available so that, like, legal costs are prohibitive expensive, and only large projects can pay the external, expensive external counsel. Like small projects that try to, and emerging parallel societies or network states, what type of legal, we need a revolution in the legal world to support this system. And there is, in my opinion, open sourcing and converting legal infrastructure into a public good. Of course, there are some limitations. You cannot do it as easily as you can do it with software, but we need a second revolution in legal to enable parallel societies.
Same question? Yeah. My view is that wide adoption of decentralized legal tools in the current state of the world is very bad. And I'll explain why. Because the trade-off is on accountability on end users. So no matter how perfect the system of governance is or the design of the mechanisms, the fundamental flaws are in operational security. That's where most of the, scams and hacks are going on. And so seeing behind the veil in, the Security Alliance has an initiative called 911, which is a first responder channel. There's a bot, you can access it on Telegram. You can look up securityalliance.org to see how to access that. And, literally behind the veil, the volunteers that monitor that channel 24/7 are just talking about how they're drowning in tickets. And, the state of security is not getting better in this industry. It's getting worse, and they're doing their best to foster, security mindset of kind of absolute paranoia. But the accountability trade-off of wide adoption here is on the end users that don't design the systems. They're not accustomed to the same kind of disclosures and guarantees of traditional infrastructure, but then they can still be hard done by in terms of using these systems. And that's why I think what you said about Kleros is really interesting, because if there's use cases where Kleros is being adopted as a very efficient and in many ways legitimate justice solution in many sectors, not just crypto projects, there's still a fallback of the traditional legal system for those people. But, to our conversation earlier today, sometimes people won't, resort to the courts after a Kleros outcome because they're satisfied that they've had justice within a, very reasonable amount of time.
I mean, in our experience, we have tried to cooperate with governments and institutions to build better design systems. What I see, and it happens a lot in this space, is that people see decentralized law, decentralized governance as a competitor to governments. As okay, if we build this, people start using this, and then the other thing becomes obsolete, and then, everyone switches. Which is, in my view, a bit, wishful thinking, because the mid-world space will still exist, and governments are going to exist. And I also have a bit a bias of, okay, let's build this. I read Sovereign Individual, I read, Network State, but kind of what we have learned is that it's better to collaborate and to see how Kleros and decentralized justice and decentralized law can fit into existing legal framework. So this is my next question is, how do you see governments and institutions are responding to decentralized law on its path to adoption?
It's a question for the lawyers on the panel.
Whoever wants to pick this, I always ask hard questions,
This certainly isn't to lionize public governments, but I think Federico's point is an important one. I don't see them vanishing anytime soon. And so at a granular level, having helped to design some novel organizational forms, we actually had to waive our counsel's professional responsibility to us because they were sufficiently uncertain as to the advice they were giving. And so judges and lawyers are inherently risk averse, and it's baked into their professional responsibilities if they're licensed to practice in a given jurisdiction. In case you couldn't tell from my words, I have a law degree, but I am not licensed to practice, in part because, boy, does that give me freedom to speculate on novel organizational design in interesting ways. But I think socializing lawyers with, the technology is critical, because Joni Pirovich that Kelsie mentioned is part of kind of a initial wave of lawyers that are willing to take the bull by the horns and actually come to understand the technology to a sufficient level to where they have enough confidence to actually give professional advice that is within the confines of their professional responsibility in their jurisdiction. And so I think ultimately familiarizing and not being hostile to lawyers per se is a really important precondition. On the government level, I think it's more a case of convincing them of the value and the viability of certain technologies that are emergent in these ecosystems. One, the finality and transparency of these networks is something that they should and do value in terms of ongoing prosecution of hacks that are occurring, over 10 years ago. You can't pursue criminals as easily absent a very clear digital paper trail, if you will, leading from A to B to Z. But in addition to that, I think zero-knowledge proofs are something that governments should welcome, because it actually enables the ability to prove the truth or a characteristic of an underlying piece of information in a way that's mathematically certain. And I think that has massive compliance benefits that we're only beginning to see the cusp of their application of. That's a piece I have currently with Sofia Kosar, also at EUI and, or actually also at BlockchainGov.
Also Argentinian, by the way.
What's that?
It's Argentinian.
Also Argentinian, a more important characteristic, to be very clear. But I think ultimately it's embracing the margins of these technologies that governments should value is essential to seeing their adoption as opposed to moves towards their eradication like we're seeing in certain corners of the governments around the world.
I think we have to build projects that work, that are functional, that provide value. And when we show the potential of this technology, the potential of this new revolutionary organizational art that we're calling a DAO, like DAO is one of more type of networks, and networks have existed all through history. We have this, you can see the history of mankind as this dichotomy between networks and hierarchies. And it's always a pendulum and it's always a spectrum. So networks are not new. What is new is this blockchain technology that empowers network to come to the next level. But we are still very early. And in this phase of DAOs in its current state, they are dysfunctional. They are like, was not only a problem of MakerDAO. A lot of big DAOs, as long as they reach a critical number, some say the Dunbar number, that was exactly the case by Maker. When it reaches 120 contributors, it started turning very dysfunctional. But why? Because we still don't have, again, the operational and legal infrastructure to make them work. And after this first era of a bit like naive first stage of DAOs, I think we will have a second phase of mature projects, which also involved interaction with legal entities, but a smart interaction that now sacrifices the values of decentralization and the whole potential that we have with achieving decentralization and the potential of networks, but also that rely on traditional instruments upgraded to this new world with tools like code deference to turn DAOs dysfunctional. We have to turn DAOs work again, and not only like a show of toxicity and speculation and short-term mindedness. There's a huge potential of this technology, and a lot is organization and legal challenges.
And I think one thing that these sort of parallel society, private order governance experiments can think about is taking consumer protection seriously within their own confines. And I think, thinking about the Security Alliance, like one area that they do collaborate with government is on the Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So they have their own, it's called SEAL ISAC initiative, where they're gathering data on the hacks that have happened on, people that have tried to infiltrate projects as staff members and so on. And then the governments are taking them seriously because they have, a valuable repository of information that can help improve security all around. So that's one way that these private order initiatives can actually, again, push out for legitimacy.
One thing I can say from my experience, we started Kleros in 2017, so we are like old here and we have worked on this for a long time, is that there is a change in the mindset of regulators. You can see that because regulators are humans, and then there is also some, I would say, generational change. When we started and we were talking to them and telling them about this decentralized, court system, they were like, this crazy idea of, citizen juries, on crypto, But now, and you can see that there is adoption by institutions, but it took a long way of getting legitimacy through teaching, going to conferences, writing articles, writing a book, writing papers. So it takes a long time because these are very slow-moving, institutions. Law is law is meant to stabilize society. It's meant to be what gives stability to social relations. So it's not that you're going to come and change everything from one day to the other. And with this, I'm going to open the floor for questions. So whoever wants to come, I think there is a mic there that you can use. Yeah.
So one of the questions I have is around identity. So I think, Eric, one of the things you were speaking to is the trade-offs and our idealized version versus when it actually hits real life, and security, as you were speaking to, Kelsie. So how do we actually have justice? Because we have law and then we have justice, which is the fulfillment of law. How do you manage justice in a decentralized network when the only carrot and stick you have is being able to cut someone's wallet off, which may not even be tied to their real world identity? They can just spool up a new one. And because we don't have actual identity properly managed on the blockchain, how do we actually effectively manage law and justice in a meaningful way?
It's a great question. And I mean, I think it's a massive design trade-off, one that's understandably been wrought, I think both due to technical limitations as well as certainly deep concern over liability given regulation in many jurisdictions. But absent, some type of identity, whether it be different proposals surrounding soul-bound tokens, you name it, I think it becomes very, very difficult to protect interests beyond the strictly economic or financial eyes that may define activity on a given network. And so for me, you can discuss what justice means between anonymous, fully capitalized, including to the point of being a string of zeros and ones leading to a ledger balance. But ultimately, for more complex human associative purposes, I think that leads to a very pale version of justice, if any at all. And so I think ultimately there are interesting solutions that I'm a doxed root node on the Q network where we are a dispute resolution layer for certain elements of that ecosystem, and it's thought to be a benefit that our identity is known. And so I think an understandable both technical limitations on identity as well as reluctance given regulatory compliance issues makes it a hard question. But I think some of the associative purposes that you see these networks being devoted to are ones that require some form of more permanent and, dare I say, human identity.
In my opinion and experience, there is like a continuum from models where you can have no identity at all and all of the interactions are going to be done through a token. So you have the token, you can do whatever. To other use cases where you don't need an identity like off-chain, but maybe my identity is my avatar in this community, and I can interact with the community through, a proof of personhood protocol. So I need to verify that I am a single person, but I don't have to say who I am in the off-chain world. And then I have this identity, and then I can prove that I am from a community because I have an SBT that represents my belonging to that community. So that is in the middle. And then for other use cases, when you have my government involved and stuff like that, you might need real life identity linked to your profile. So for some cases, we can just do the token thing. For others, it's okay to do the pseudonymous identity, and others need real life. And they are fine. They are different just use cases. All good.
Yeah, I think I would not underestimate the potential of tokenized reputation systems to build a more just identity solution. And for example, in our case, we are for the platform that we are working for, Maker and Beyond, we are developing a token that is called the proof of work token, and this proof of work token basically attests that you deliver some type of contribution to a public good. And if you do that tokenized and it's non-transferable, then you start doing a reputation system, and then can use this online attestation that you contributed so much work, and this work can have so much value or so much cost that could be used as a primitive for many other interactions in the system. So it also has its risks, but I think we should explore the tokenized reputation system to attest this function of attestation which is critical. It's one of the core properties of asymmetric cryptography, this digital signature. You attest something and you tokenize this attestation, and then you can use this attestation in other type of interactions. So yeah, tokenized reputation system is one interesting design space.
Thank you for the question. For the sake of time, I'd say the work that I've done writing on identity was around Sybil attacks and the automation of attack and defense. I did a study on an organization called BlockchainGov that I also do consulting with. That's available on my GitHub. And then also Pooja is around somewhere and is running a workshop or a lightning talk later today, and she's thought really deeply about identity as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just end with one comment. Federico, I think what you were saying is that it's contextually dependent, right? And there's no one solution that fits everything. And I think that's more honest because administering justice a lot of the times is geo-dependent, depending on the context, because you have communities and you have real harm and you have who's going to throw someone to prison, right? Like that's a question. When we talk about a monopoly of violence in a state and the need to be able to have the ability to create accountability, you need to be able to have accountability. And on more light cases, maybe you have proof of reputation because nobody wants to get kicked off eBay, you know? It's really nice to have 5 stars and you don't want 4.5 stars on Airbnb. So when we're actually going towards moving from this kind of light, I would call it light test case, DAO, economic to more network state, how would we ever be able to create a system of real justice when we don't have the ability to control the monopoly of violence?
I mean, I have tons of things to reply, but let's give time for more questions because but I can answer later.
Should we take all the questions and then just answer what we can and take it offline?
There's 2 more, so
3
maybe
minutes
3 more.
remaining. So.
Yeah, maybe you can do them and then we will answer whatever we can.
Good idea. Hussam of Registry Chain. Probably next Parallel Society conference, we will have a humanoid here with us. It's like a Optimus or something. I wonder, if it's the only person here who's concerned about what's this humanoid policy around. It would be privacy preserving. What's the Newton power of this robot inside my premises? And how do you see a platform or framework to regulate all these frontier entities, whether we're talking about humanoid, autonomous vehicles, and AIs? What would be reasonably doable platform or framework to regulate them instead of waiting for state to start regulating that and they make a big mess? Thank you.
Good question. Really thought-provoking. We're talking about very broad, very nebulous discussions here. I'd like to put a pin down on something that's going to affect all of us and some of us with less money faster: climate change. If you were looking at any single area where accountability and some sort of hard and fast, trustless society that can be held across individuals and governments, the impact of climate change, the way we handle that, the infrastructure for it, I would just love to put it in front of you if any of you have had any thoughts around handling that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Eric, you mentioned that governments should adopt or be amenable to zero-knowledge proofs for compliance reasons. My question is, what's the pitch to governments for that when they're sort of set up to just accumulate as much and capture as much information as possible, and B, they're dealing with a populace that don't necessarily value privacy at a critical mass, and to have kind of been battered into complying into giving up that information? Sort of what's the pitch? Where's the incentive for them to adopt that?
So I'll take that last question very briefly. I'm actually giving a talk pursuant to talking to regulators at the Shielding Summit on Wednesday. And so ultimately, I think not all governments to a great extent respect privacy to the extent it's demanded by their citizens and enshrined in constitutional as well as domestic law and regulation. And so it's not to say that they don't want to protect privacy, but it does come up against other legitimate enforcement objectives in a very, very painful way relative to the fact that most of our other rights don't directly conflict with government objectives. And climate change is far more than a couple seconds of an answer, so I'm going to punt on that one. But I would also say I do think industry self-regulation is a massively important bulwark in the cases of frontier tech, as against more ill-fitting and more aggressive, government regulation. And so I think for all frontier technologies to posit some measure of self-regulation is actually really, really, really critical for their survival writ large.
The clock here says 10 seconds, so if you have some final thoughts before the decentralized law executes us. No? Yeah, please, you finalize this, please.
Time's up. Ending thoughts. Help us build the legal infrastructure that network organizations need together, and let's open source legal and disrupt the industry to take us to the next level.
Good job. Thank you, guys.